All right, let's take a look at what we were talking about on this one here, the accompaniment-ish style. Now, you might have noticed that I played a fair amount of bass movement. I'm really thinking like a bass player would. And a lot of times the bass notes that I'm using on this first stage here are a chord, then a bass note by itself, maybe while the chord still rings, and then a new chord and followed by a new bass note. So we're not playing a chord on every beat necessarily, although there are a couple of places where we did that. But let's take a look at it. The first chord is this ubiquitous augmented triad, which sets up so many T-Bone Walker songs and a various, even something like Oh Darlin' by the Beatles starts with that sound. And it just lets us hang. It doesn't even establish the tempo so much, although it can. If I play this, boop-a-doo-ding, and someone who's listening is going to pick up that tempo. And then we start on the 1 chord, and we bounce to the 5. It could be 5 dominant or 5, or just a 5 augmented triad. So it could be this. Okay, or it could be with that augmented chord. Any of those possibilities. This is that bounce back thing I was talking about before, where you play the 1, it's 5, it sends you right back to 1 again. Kind of like a way of getting a little movement without changing too much about it. So we're going to play 1, 5. Now notice I go little approach, pum, that just propels the thing. So I'm not strumming or putting a lot of energy into a beat. So I use the bass notes to sort of feather in this kind of punctuation and a pulse and a little bit of syncopation to drive it forward. So it sounds like this. Then 4th beat F, leading to E minor 7 to A. This is an unusual thing that this song taught me about, where you play in the key of G. I'm going to play E minor to A7 twice. I think this is basically an elaboration on 2 dominant. So maybe the simple version would be 1. to 2 dominant. Look at it like this, it becomes a lot simpler. Then 2 dominant always wants to go to 2 minor. Right? So it's a good idea to know the simplest harmonic pathway through a song so you can elaborate on it without getting confused. So what we're doing is we're putting A7 together with its companion, the E minor 7th chord. And you may have heard Robin Ford's famous version of this song. He's probably most famous amongst our generation because this is quite an old song. And he did it again relatively recently, and he played this sound. We're going to hint at that without being blatant about it. So we have 1, 5, 1. Then approaching E minor from a half step, A7, E minor to A7. One time I went, one time I went a little contrapuntal idea to break things up a little bit. And then we have our friend, the 2-5-1 leading to the turnaround, and I played A minor, a new bass note while the chord rang, C6, a new bass note, D7 of any kind. I played this one, but you could play this one. Something like that. So let's hear what that sounds like. Half step from above. Half step into each chord. Just a bass note. Notice I grabbed that with my thumb because I just find it easier. Most of the right hand that we're looking at here is just sort of pumping these beautiful chords occasionally, but not too frequently, putting in an extra melody note or dividing the chord up low to high. Then there's another 8 bars with a slightly different ending. And that slightly different ending, which is the second ending, would be 1, 4, back to 1. Then approaching the bridge, which is what we call a cycle bridge, we go to the 3rd degree of G, which is B, and we play all dominant 7th chords, B7, E7, A7, and D7. If you're familiar with rhythm changes from some of the jazz tunes you might know, this is what we call a rhythm bridge. So if I have to tell anybody about this real quick, I either say cycle bridge starting on 3, or I just say the rhythm changes bridge, and they'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, so then we take that second ending. Then a half step above B, B7. Just make a little melody here. Da, da, right? Then I play this movement I learned from Honeysuckle Rose. E7, E minor 11, or E11, there's no minor or major about it. Then E diminished and E7. So that would sound like this. We'll do more on this bar later. The E stays in the bass. Then A7, and I'm going to walk the tenths. That's walking tenths means or earlier when we played this type of thing, that's basically a fleshed out version of the walking tenths. And then finally the last 2 bars of the bridge are a 2/5 back to the key. And you could stop there like a ba-bo doo dee da doo dee. All the same. Then a 2/5 to turn it around. You've seen that one before. One of the things about it, the way I think about this is we build a vocabulary of ways to get through changes that allow for melody improvisation. So if I play this, one of the things I sit at home and do is I practice all kinds of melodic variations up above that movement. So I don't have to feel bad about, oh, I'm just playing the same old thing, because I have all these different variations that I can access, hopefully that you'll see in the next section or two on these typical movements. Okay, then the very last 2 bars are a really neat classic turnaround. Right? And that because there's so much information there, there's a few different ways to get around it. You can say, that would be one way to do it. You can do it another way. They all start like this, then go minor, and then play a diminished chord here, and then a dominant 7th chord here, and get this chromatic descent. You start to notice that if you study this stuff and really look into it, you start to notice that there are 2 or 3, maybe 4 different variations on these turnarounds having to do with bass notes, either chromatic movement or in fourths or some combination of chromatic and fourths. And really the bass note is what's most different about each pathway.